Welcome to Embedded. I am Alicia White, alongside Christopher White. But I really want to confuse you today, so we're having Chris Gammell on as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm back. Thanks for having me back.
How are you doing? It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. I will be honest, most of the time I'm hearing both of you at like 2x speed. And so this is like down tempo. This is a down tempo embedded FM for me. That's the live thing.
Well, I'll try to talk a lot faster.
We can talk a lot faster.
Okay,
can you tell me about yourself?
Sure. I am a longtime electronics person, and I spend a lot of time in the internet as well, in places like the Amp Hour and Contextual Electronics. And I work for a company called Goliath. I run a consulting forum, and I enjoy talking about electronics on the internet with folks like yourself.
You don't introduce yourself as an electrical engineer.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I guess I haven't done that in a while. Usually when I'm introducing myself in public, I usually just say I design electronics because that's pretty straight to the point what I want to talk about anyways, and because some people who are electrical engineers, they're working on power lines, whatever, and I want people to ask me about electronics.
Fair enough.
Is that selfish? It's selfish.
And the lines have gotten very blurred in recent years.
Yeah. I have been doing more firmware. That's I was excited to be asked back on here. I've been voraciously listening and to the show and all your great guests, and doing more studying and learning alongside my coworkers. And so I don't consider myself a firmware person yet, but I aspire to be.
Are you ready for lightning round?
Sure.
What is your favorite lightning round question?
Robot.
What is your favorite fictional robot?
Wally.
Okay, I just figured I had to ask it since it was his favorite.
Yeah.
You go to an industry conference evening party where you don't know anyone. What do you do?
Bring out the electronics that I brought with me and start showing it to people.
I feel like we're starting a role-playing game. Somebody reacts negatively to your electronics.
There's a door.
Yeah. You forgot your power supply. What do you do next? What is your favorite mic to use yourself for podcasting or anything?
I'd say Zoom H1 is the most versatile because I bring it mobile with me.
If you didn't have a podcast, would you start one now?
I'd probably start a video channel now.
Favorite IoT device?
Chipset or end device?
End device.
Pass.
Least favorite IoT device?
Most of them.
Do you have a favorite kid's toy?
Ooh, it's not technically a kid's toy, but I own a melodica and my daughter plays it a lot, and I think that's my favorite kid's toy.
What are your personal feelings about firmware, ranked from 1 to 10? 1 being it should be banned, 10 you'd like to run firmware in your own head.
5.
What would you have answered 5 years ago?
5?
Oh, all right.
Yeah, non-committal. Those were big extremes.
If you could teach a college class, what would you want to teach?
Ooh.
Take your time. This would be
like
2x.
Yeah. How to how to build anything, like the MIT style class, but probably I wouldn't be that good.
You didn't say what you're qualified to teach. It's what you want to teach.
Oh yeah. How about this? Can I rephrase
Archery.
the question? What is the question? What is the class that I wish I would have had? Maybe.
Okay.
And it's somewhere. It's like a mix between how to build anything at MIT and the analog electronics class that Larry Sears taught at my alma mater out of Art of Electronics. And maybe also Jay Carlson's class too. Can I smush a bunch of classes together?
Sure. I have no problem with that.
Okay, great.
We'll make it a whole semester.
Yeah. Whole year, whole college career. How about that?
So I hear you work at a company called Goliath.
Nice one. Yeah, I work at a company called Goliath, and I've heard it pronounced many different ways. I've seen, usually it's easy to tell when people are writing from at like without much context, because then they spell it the traditional way with an A, G-O-L-I-A-T-H.
Corrected all my notes.
I went spell checked her entire notes this morning because I forgot that it was spelled.
And if people haven't seen the actual spelling, there's IoT in the middle, and I have razzed John Barry, the founder and CEO, many times about it. There are many companies out there where if you like look at the spelling, you're like, wait, why is that spelled like that? And there's usually an IoT in there somewhere. So, what are you gonna do?
What do you do there?
I am the developer relations lead. And for hardware and firmware people, I often transpose that to be, it's like being an applications engineer. So I do a lot of reference design hardware. So basically I'm kind of the first user of a lot of different things. And I work with my good friend, Mike Stish, former editor of Hackaday and firmware par excellence. He's my right-hand man around firmware and teacher.
Do you have users come to you and say, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? Or I'm having a problem? Or are you more on the push stuff to developer side?
Yeah, it's the second one. And actually we're trying to hire the first one right now. So the way we split that up is like, if someone who came to us and said, hey, help me build this thing, it would be like a field applications engineer.
Right. Okay.
Because they're often kind of re-implementing a lot of the stuff that an applications team at the factory might do. And so Mike and I are making the stuff kind of at the, quote unquote factory. And, just trying to like retarget all the Goliath stuff to different platforms, different application spaces, different hardware, different, weird visualization things that we can dream up, that sort of thing. So it's really like a playground in the IoT space, which is great.
Actually, maybe we should do a little bit better definition. I mean, we've made jokes about IoT being in the name Goliath, and that's why it's possibly actually pronounced Goliath. But okay, so there's something to do with IoT. There's something to do with Zephyr. It's got hardware. It's got software. What is it?
What is it? Yeah, that's a good question. So the way I talk about it is there's two pieces. The product, the actual thing that people would and hopefully do buy is the server stuff, right? So it's a CoAP gateway, and there's a bunch of databasing stuff, and there's management console, so like a website you can log into and see all the devices you have, device management console there, and then there's a bunch of services, managed services built on top of it. And then there's the device side, which I'll talk about in a second. But the main thing is it's a way to kind of translate all the stuff you need to be doing on a small, constrained microcontroller device that's connected to the internet, and then kind of make it suitable to talk to things that are very processing heavy and out in the cloud world, basically. So you think about like someone's running a massive database on AWS. It's not a great idea to do an HTTP call from a little cellular device out in the field that's battery powered. It's better to do it over CoAP, which is a constrained application protocol, and to put some compression on it and to talk to this gateway and then use a bunch of the APIs that are set up to handle all of the data that you want to be sending back and forth to that constrained device. And so Goliath is that cloud stuff. That is the actual product. Then there's a second device side aspect, which is the enablement. And that's basically now that I have this CoAP gateway and all this stuff that sounds big and scary, which it can be, how do I actually talk to it from a piece of constrained hardware, like a cellular IoT device? And that is the device side and the enablement piece. That is basically Goliath has an open source SDK, or multiple open source SDKs built around NRF Connect Studio, which is based on Zephyr. There's an NXP port also in Zephyr. There's a Modus Toolbox SDK, which is really free RTOS, and we can talk about the free RTOS versus Zephyr thing. And then there's an ESP IDF SDK as well. So on all of these different vendor ecosystems, all of the things that it takes, so like a simplification of all the stuff under the hood, not the connectivity, but like basically you don't have to open any sockets, you don't have to manage any of the connection stuff. It's basically a single line call, and all you say is, I want to send this sensor reading to the cloud, and I want it to be timestamped. And that then is handled all the way up the chain, all the way through the cloud. And then that data is available for a certain amount of time on the Goliath platform. And then it can also be exported out to these large hyperscaler things and your cloud team that might want to have it, pass through in a HTTP, a JSON packet basically over HTTP. So kind of just that, I think about it like Goliath helps with that really tight pipe down to your constrained device in the field, and then helps that communication between the cloud and your device. And then it turns around and says to cloud teams and says, hey, now that this data's here, let's make it easier for cloud teams to process it and put it on an app and control the device that's out in the field, that sort of thing. So
there's a lot there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make an example because I need concrete things. Let's say I have an array of 1,000 seismic sensors.
Okay, that's a great example. Yeah.
And they're scattered around, I don't know, let's say California. And I can get GPS readings, I can get good time, I can get the current activity level of tectonics. And so I bundle these up and I send them to a Goliath server through some magic, through some Zephyr magic that's a single call and super cool. Mm-hmm. And then Goliath acts as an intermediary so that I don't have to talk directly to an AWS server or some other server that may change.
Yeah, that is all correct stuff. Yes.
And do you handle logging errors and firmware update?
That's right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So let's just stick in the Zephyr world because that's where I mostly operate with our device side stuff. So Zephyr is a real-time operating system and an ecosystem, and what we do is inside the Goliath Zephyr SDK there's basically hooks into a lot of the stuff that's under the hood. So under the hood in a lot of Zephyr systems, well, I think actually all Zephyr systems, the bootloader is MCU boot, and there's a logging subsystem as well. And so the Goliath SDK hooks into the logging subsystem. So the four levels of logging that you might have, which are usually debug, info, warning, and errors that might pop up on a serial console. You basically flip a switch and you say, I want this to hook into the Goliath SDK. And then all of those logging messages also get pushed up to the Goliath cloud, and they're visible on the console. You can push them out externally if you wanted to. Same thing for the over-the-air updates. You decide you want to use the OTA service. I'll say OTA normally for over-the-air. And you turn on a couple switches, you configure some stuff, you follow some of our example code, and then it downloads, basically it listens for new firmware updates. It downloads the package to a secondary memory location, and then it uses the MCU boot APIs to say, hey, there's a new image here. It's been validated. Go switch from zone A to zone B. And I'm sure both of you can relate to that. Like, all of this stuff has always been possible, but it's often been custom.
But there have been other companies that have been trying to do this. I mean, Electric Imp,
sure. Yeah.
And Particle and Memfault.
Memfault's a corner of this, though, right? They don't do so much the telemetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Memfault does really great OTA stuff, great OTA stuff. But yeah, they don't do they kind of say the data stuff. That's, you do that however you want to. And so we know the Memfault folks, they're great. They do a really good job. Some of the other examples you gave there are tied to hardware. And that's mm-hmm. really the big, so there's two big things there. One is if you want to do custom hardware, you're kind of out on your own there. So some of the other platforms that are vertically integrated, they really depend on having kind of like a daemon sitting on the custom hardware where there's some part of the code that you don't control. So you're not compiling in the OTA part. It's already been pre-compiled, or it's built into the hardware, or you're doing like a 2-chip solution there. So that's one thing. And then another thing is even some of the platforms where maybe it's optional custom hardware, well, the reason that I joined Goliath was actually John sold me on the thing when you go to production, which is what happens when you don't want to use Goliath specific managed servers anymore. What if you want to what if you have 10 million devices? And the answer is the Goliath cloud piece, the product piece, that can be packaged up and then licensed to go on anyone's infrastructure. So it can go on your AWS instance. It can go on your server closet in your facility, right behind a firewall. You can basically take the Goliath product, the software, and deploy that anywhere. And that is not completely rare. There are one or two other companies that do that. But in this specific space with this hardware focus, I had never seen that before.
So you said licensing. Mm-hmm. Are you making money by licensing the whole thing so other people can implement their own servers, or by not the hardware because you're allowing people to design their own? Mm-hmm. And the device side is a free API. Mm-hmm. So where does the money come from?
Where's the money come from? Good question. I think that's always a good question when you're talking to like a startup and you're considering using
power harvesting.
Yeah. Tiny Bitcoin miners.
No.
Please don't make that the title of the show. That would be really false advertising, right? I know how you do. So at the beginning, so like first 50 devices are free. If you want to just use the Goliath cloud solution right now, like if the stuff I use every day, I talk specifically to the Goliath cloud version, and that's basically the Goliath software, like run the Goliath, effectively the Goliath enterprise software running on our own Google Cloud instance. But it could be AWS, it could be Azure, whatever. And that's basically you pay past 50 devices, you start paying per device per year, sort of thing. And that then, much like Digikey, the price drops as you add more units to it. But at a certain point, there's a crossover where it makes sense to basically just have your own cloud and your own version of the cloud. And then that's when licensing comes in. And normally that is still administered by Goliath, but it's your infrastructure. So you're paying for the Amazon EC2 instances or whatever the thing it's installed onto. I guess that would actually probably be like Kubernetes stuff. I am not in that world. So I probably sound stupid there, but that would basically be like, you'd be paying your cloud bill, and you likely already have if you're a company that's big enough to do this sort of thing, you probably already have a cloud team paying a cloud bill, but it doesn't actually matter that what that underlying infrastructure is, because it's all abstracted by Kubernetes.
I have a slight side question before we go back to discussing that.
Sure.
Since you get to see all this stuff, and presumably you get to see what customers are doing, has there been any move to, like you mentioned, you could conceivably deploy all this to your own infrastructure, your really own infrastructure behind your own firewall. Has there been any movement away from, quote, the big cloud to like, oh, I'm going to host my own stuff, or is it just pretty much still all people trusting AWS?
And Azure. Don't forget Azure.
Excuse me.
And Azure. Azure's huge. I mean, it's getting so big. Yeah. They're eating the market. I think there is that move, but it's usually teams that are so big that they have their own internal cloud teams, basically making something that looks like Goliath.
Yeah.
And really, that's when you get big enough, right? So like John, the founder, used to be at Nest, and they had this, but it was like many hundreds of people doing that sort of thing, and building out a lot of the infrastructure. It was early on. Same kind of thing. You could build some of this stuff, but it's not accessible to small teams. And so again, the reason I'm excited about it, because it was like me as a hardware consultant, I could deliver stuff that I had just never been able to do before. Like I had projects where I would hire a firmware person, hire a cloud person, that sort of thing. And even still, that was kind of risky. Just having 3 people doing that sort of thing. Now it's like you actually have these capabilities without needing to have your first couple cloud people.
Okay, so this sounds like software. I mean, it all sounds like a lot of software.
Yep. Yes.
And I know but you say electronics.
Well, yeah.
Have we lured you to the dark side?
Yeah, it is a lot of software. another reason I was excited is because I was excited to get better at firmware. Like I was consulting for 3 years in the hardware space, and one thing I talk about is like, it was like super choppy work, right? Like you do hardware and like, I go hard on a project and design a board, and it would be like, maybe a month of like all the way through, and maybe I'd have a couple of people doing that. But then I wasn't doing the firmware. So it was like, all right, now I wait for the firmware person to go and tell me what I messed up and turn the crank in 3 months from now, that sort of thing. And it was just like super choppy work. And I started wanting to do more of it. And then I kind of had an opportunity to do more of it at Goliath. So that's another reason I was excited about the opportunity. Learn more about RTOSs, learn more about firmware, learn more about deployment, that sort of thing.
So for RTOSs, Zephyr or free RTOS?
¿Por qué no los dos? I think it's important actually to make distinctions about ecosystem versus RTOS. That's one thing I've been doing a lot more lately. Because Zephyr is an RTOS, but it's really an ecosystem. It's both. Whereas free RTOS is an RTOS first, and there's no ecosystem unless you put one around it. So like ESP IDF is an ecosystem built on top of free RTOS, and Modus Toolbox is the Infineon ecosystem built on top of free RTOS. That sort of thing.
And Zephyr is both.
That's right. Yep.
And we've talked about Zephyr. It takes its cues more from the Linux world than the traditional RTOS world.
Mm.
Yes, but it's still an RTOS.
It's still an RTOS.
It's still small.
It's not Linux, but many of its design choices and things.
Have you tried Zephyr or no?
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Mostly
I had some students when I was teaching use it, and that made me go investigate more. And it was, it actually seemed a little nicer than free RTOS. Definitely more integrated into the NRF. And so it was it depended on which chip you were using. Like Modus, you definitely would use free RTOS. And last time I looked, ST seemed easier with free RTOS.
I'm being so good right now.
Why?
Because you guys keep saying Modus.
And you just want to barf on it, don't you?
Well, that's a bit extreme, but...
Make gagging sounds?
Maybe.
They're trying.
It's better than the previous IDE system that they had.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So where were we? Zephyr.
We were talking about Zephyr, and then you asked him why he became a firmware engineer.
No, it seems like the RTOS you choose is in large part dependent on the chip you choose.
Right.
I think I do think I think there's like happy paths for each chip vendor. And like I'm doing some of the like the silicon partnership stuff for Goliath in early days as well. Like, so I know a lot of the people in those companies I mentioned, and it's actually kind of cool, like meeting them and stuff. But it is, I'd be curious to hear if you can relate to this, but like once you're in a chip ecosystem, once you've decided on your micro, I feel like that kind of defines so many other things about the project.
Yes. And it's distressing, especially some micros are more about that than others. Like the Infineon stuff is very opinionated, I feel like.
ST, and so is Nordic. Nordic is super opinionated.
Probably the least opinionated, where people kind of can do what they want, even though, they want to, Cube is what they recommend, but you can always do more. Yeah. But I felt like doing projects, we did a recent project with Infineon. Sorry, I keep trying to say Cypress.
Same. They are merged for people that don't know, like that they bought Cypress. Yeah.
If you wanted to do something different than they wanted, it was like you spent a great amount of time switching us to GCC. And that was really, really hard compared to doing that for ST, I think. Would you say so?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All sorts of weird problems. So, it definitely. And clients, forgive me for going on about this, but clients tend to like that, I think. Like, it's like, oh, we got this chip and we got all this stuff and we don't have to think about it. And so there's been a number of clients I've gone into. I was like, well, we chose this and here's what it is. And we hate it, but also we love it.
I think one thing I think about is look upon my past choices with a bit of guilt, and like so much of it is like I am just specsmanship and just like looking at data sheets and like, oh, this one has this peripheral. And I really, I sell myself. I'm like, oh, I really need 6 USARTs and I really need this, this DMA thing that's like super fancy, whatever. And I had like I gave no thought to the firmware.
But also you have to program it in Fortran.
Right. Exactly. And now I am that firmware person. I'm like, oh yeah, like that. And it like, I think increasingly over time, that companies are still going to do this, especially ones that are super siloed, right? Where like there's a hardware team and there's a firmware team and they talk like during integration and that's about it. But that, talk to your hardware folks, firmware folks, and ask them to be nicer about this sort of, man. I wish I would have been a little bit more empathetic on this side of things, because like now that I love Nordic, a lot of the stuff I listed, they all have ups and downs, but the Nordic stuff is what I'm using most often right now. And their software focus, they are becoming a software company that makes hardware, which is interesting. And I think the chip companies that win over the long term do that. And to their credit, Espressif is doing that too, which is interesting. Like they have a very strong development team. So yeah.
Espressif came out and they had a super cheap, interesting chip that was a Wi-Fi chip, and people just adored it. And I never really got into it because it didn't seem professional level. It seemed like a great hobby thing, but didn't have all of the features I wanted for clients.
Firmware or hardware features?
Or the polish, maybe?
The firmware features, the software features.
Yeah, okay.
It was a little buggy. You had to play in their playground. The firmware update was the
Wi-Fi API was weird
Wi-Fi
too.
API,
at least initially. Yeah.
To set the user's Wi-Fi was totally dorky. But I also know...
Which is like an important, like that's such a user-focused thing though, like that if you don't get that right, that can be really impactful.
And it's the first thing the user does. So if it looks bad, it just all looks bad. Yeah. And there wasn't an easy way to change it. But I don't even want to say a dozen years ago because I don't know how long ago it was. But that was their first foray. And it made a pretty big splash, but I never got into it. And I know Espressif has changed a lot since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they keep investing quite a bit. They have the ESP-IDF team. I feel like there's, most people come to Espressif in kind of the Arduino context and increasingly the Platform IO context, which is usually using Arduino Core, and making that switch over to, I remember Bart Dring, who's a Chicago friend. He was using ESP-IDF, and I just remember looking at him and be like, I have no idea what you're doing. But it was, he was getting really into like as that was getting built up, and I think they've invested a lot in that ecosystem, and it's increasingly like I said, it's ecosystem level. They're introducing like a kind of like marketplace for sensor drivers and things like that. So all of these things are making it a better experience, I feel like, for pro level developers. But I think most people are still coming to it from Arduino, so there's different expectations. And then they also have a Zephyr team, so they're also porting to they've continued to port to Zephyr as well. So kind of a dual solution there.
It's an interesting device because I feel like it lives in its own architectural corner compared to the other ones, which have traditional.
They're Cortex-Ms now.
Oh, they're RISC-V now. RISC-V.
They're RISC-V.
Yeah.
So
okay.
yes,
the C3 is a RISC-V, but
right.
It's the smaller part and lower power. They still have Extensa on some of the newer stuff.
Right, that's what I was talking about.
Increasingly, so like the H2 is one of their new 802.15.4 chips, so that can run like Thread and Zigbee. And for like the Matter, they're getting big into Matter, and that is, I believe, RISC-V, and I think all of them have like a kind of a low power RISC-V part as well.
It's funny that because I keep seeing ESP parts being taped onto low power parts as the Wi-Fi. So it's like this thing with, 200 megahertz, 32-bit, tons of power attached to the Raspberry Pi 2040.
Right.
It's just so funny. Like, why are you doing this?
Right. And they still use it, and they slap the ESP-AT firmware image on there, and then they just talked it over AT command, which is like, I mean, that's another way, to go back to the IoT thing. That's how a lot of stuff still operates, right? So if you want to get away from, like, you want to use AWS IoT, but you want to still use your PIC 18, well, you grab a ESP32 or you get like a QuickTel modem, and there's images that you can flash onto these things that you're just sending AT commands effectively to it. But then there's added cost, there's added power. Like, so all of these architectural decisions that get made very, very early on can really impact your product performance when you really get to the optimization stage.
You have an RV towing a Mini.
Yeah. It's worse when the Mini tows the RV.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so
I had a couple more
Goliath
questions. So you something I was curious about, like you talked about how the API is super simple and you just, whatever, send to the cloud. But there's, having done some projects that do IoT stuff, there's a lot of security and certificate stuff that needs to be managed. How do you make that easy if you did?
So at the begin, so like if you're booting if you're booting a Goliath program right now, I'd say don't use certificates for prototyping.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we have pre-shared key IDs and pre-shared keys, PSK ID, PSK, which is basically username, password.
Yeah.
So Zephyr has a bunch of shells in it, which is awesome. So basically you can turn on. So the way that we normally do it, I say Mike does it, and then I go and type in stuff after he's done it. But basically, there's a settings service and a settings shell inside of Zephyr, right? So you turn that on in the prj.conf files, which are basically like the kconfig, basically how you turn things on and off. And you turn on the shell there, and then you say in one of the other configuration files, hey, I'm going to set the Goliath credentials in over the UART, and so then when your device boots up, you go onto the serial terminal, you type in your PSK ID, and then you are validated onto the Goliath cloud using embed TLS. It's actually a DTLS authentication. It's DTLS connection because it is UDP instead of TCP. So it has to be DTLS. I've learned a lot of these things over time. And I still don't quite get it, but I know. So basically, you can't connect to Goliath unencrypted, but that's kind of the simple way to do it. Then, like you said, certificates are like this big hassle, but it's pretty easy. So we have a new certificate generation feature as well, so that you can generate, and then you'd have to have your own private key store, or what is it called, a
vault?
PKI?
I don't know.
Private key infrastructure.
Right.
And, basically like a vault where you would have your private keys stored somewhere secure, and then you would have the public keys. You would never upload the private keys to Goliath. You would only upload the private.
No, you put the private keys in GitHub.
Private keys. Yeah, right. Put them on Twitter. Why not? Nobody goes there anymore.
And so Goliath wouldn't have access to my data
then? Goliath would have access to your data because it would be decrypted at the once it hits the CoAP endpoint.
What if I didn't want it to be?
Then you probably wouldn't send packets to Goliath because we visualize the data that comes through Goliath. So where would you want it to go in that case? I mean, so let's go back to the seismology example that you gave. So you'd want to have like encrypted accelerometer data that doesn't get displayed in Goliath. It just forwards it along. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want you to be able to see my data because nobody will ever know what my seismic sensors are actually doing.
Where is it getting decrypted?
On my servers. Those servers that are supposed to pick up the data from Goliath.
I think that,
I don't have a good answer to that one because I've never seen anyone do that. It kind of defeats the purpose too, right? So like you might have kind of the constrained pipe at that point, but at that point you would just kind of set up your own CoAP endpoint on your servers, and then you would just talk directly to that, right? So like you're assuming all these little sensors are cellular based, right? They have a connection to Goliath over CoAP, right? And they have a certificate or a PSK ID talking to the Goliath servers. And you're just getting maybe you just want OTA updates from the Goliath server. That's fine. You could just do that. But then if you wanted to only send your data somewhere else because you didn't want Goliath to have access to it, then I'd say just bypass Goliath and go around and have your own CoAP server. But then you're paying for infrastructure twice at that point. And you'd have to manage your own CoAP endpoint, which is non-trivial.
There's some good reasons to do that, but I have a couple questions before I get to them.
Sure.
What about health checking? Do you check heartbeats? Do you plot sensors that are rebooting constantly, or is that all memfault?
So there is a heartbeat that gets checked on the console. Basically, you can see kind of like last connection time, that sort of thing. In terms of like trace data, like off the actual processor, that's where memfault is just fantastic. So like that kind of thing, you probably want to do memfault for that, kind of lowest level. But if you're okay with just like logging messages, connection status, that sort of thing, that's kind of where we don't have any of that stuff today. So, we have logging and connection status. We don't have like the trace kind of stuff because memfault's a really great solution for that sort of thing.
But if I had 1,000 sensors and I needed to know which one was offline, I could probably do that.
That is accessible from Goliath. Yep. And it's accessible from the REST API too, right? So you think about like the other thing that I always think about is like, so a common context in a lot of like IoT things, people are like, well, I can set up my own MQTT broker. I'm like, yes, you can. And that is great. But like an MQTT broker kind of sitting out in the world, you say you just had like a Raspberry Pi in your home office running an MQTT broker. Like, yes, you could use that as a IoT kind of concentrator of sensor data and you can connect to it. But there's a couple of things missing from there. One is a databasing aspect, right? So like there is actual like a caching timeout on an MQTT broker. So you say the temperature is 23 and you're sending that from afar to this broker, and maybe something's listening and saying, oh, I just saw that the sensor, sensor 55 just updated and says its temperature is 23, but now sensor 55 now sends the temperatures went up by a degree. That last reading's gone, right? So unless you're doing some kind of databasing on that MQTT broker, then that data doesn't persist. And at least as far as I understand it, maybe I'm wrong about that sort of thing, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. So you need to basically be doing that databasing yourself. You need to like listen for data. Often I hear people say like, oh, I write Python scripts and I put it into a cockroach DB or whatever. And, there's just a lot of, it's totally possible to do it, but like this kind of like writing scripts to do that sort of thing is very fragile from my perspective. Especially if I'm writing them. And then the other thing is like, then how do I access that data? So you think about like, maybe my device out in the world is speaking over MQTT, which is its own network layer. It's protocol. It's a protocol. So that sensor 55 is out in the world and it's giving me temperatures over MQTT. Well, if I want to be listening to that, I also need to be speaking MQTT to listen to it. And it's possible to do that. You can have interfaces, but at some point, it's usually better to have something like a REST API. So like basically you think about an app probably doesn't want to be, an app on your phone probably doesn't want to be speaking MQTT to some broker somewhere. Instead, it wants to do a call to an API that is kind of fixed in time, and then they can go and fetch the data. And so that's kind of the REST API layer. So again, things that are external to the service, whatever it is, if not Goliath, you have an app, you have a website, whatever, you want some kind of generalized interface to access that data and hopefully control the devices out in the field because you want it to be bidirectional.
So back to the private data. Let's say it's someone's heartbeat or someone's location, any personal information you don't want Goliath to have access to. Okay. You're just not handling that case right now? All data sent through the Goliath SDK to the Goliath console is decrypted and displayed for your convenience. So yeah, that is. I mean, I think about companies like Fitbit, where that was a huge deal for them, that
Sure.
it was encrypted end to end. Or ShotSpotter, where they absolutely would not let you have any data, but they would have loved the monitoring service.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually reminds me, can I burst data to Goliath? Like if I get a seismic event, can I then send you high quality data that covers 60 seconds? Or is it really just one piece of information at some constant frequency?
That is determined only by the tier of service that you have. So there's different tiers of service based on like how often you can send data, but there are burst limits as well. So yeah, it is possible.
Okay.
But there's not like, it's defined. So basically, if you think about it like the CoAP endpoint, if you're validated to send data to that CoAP endpoint, you can kind of send it as often as you want. If you send way too much, it's going to start rejecting calls because we had an early user who said, something's not working with this device. And we went and looked at it, and they were writing this really tight loop on an ESP32. And it was like, they were saying like 20,000 data points a second. And we're like, yeah, that's too much. That's too much. You would never, ever do that. That's why it didn't work for them.
You've said CoAP endpoint a bunch, and I should have asked, what exactly is that?
So CoAP is Constrained Application Protocol. And basically, it is a lower overhead networking layer. I think I'm saying this right. But basically, it's kind of an alternative to MQTT that has lower overhead. It's UDP based, and it runs things like a lot of things. It's really good for. It's optimized for cellular. That's kind of where Goliath started, was in the cellular space. And it also works on things like Thread. So there's I keep saying CoAP endpoint, but it's really, that part is invisible to the user. You won't have to be thinking about it.
Yeah, we used it at Fitbit
mm-hmm.
in later days. But yeah, it's just another networking protocol
mm-hmm.
that tries to take some of the overhead out of what people were doing with it, like you said, HTTP.
Yeah. Another thing that's built into the SDK as well is compression as well. So there's CBOR compression. So again, like you don't have like you're just like using the API, but then you can basically say if you want it to be JSON or if you want it to be CBOR, which is a serialization compression. And that saves another like 20% overhead as well. So again, if like you're doing cellular stuff, that really starts to add up on your cell bill and your power and all that other stuff.
So do most of your clients, or most of your users use cell modems, or are they heading towards Wi-Fi?
I think because it's a lot of industrial users, there's a lot of cellular, but it's a healthy mix. So the four things that we support are cellular, Wi-Fi, Thread, and Ethernet.
Not Zigbee.
Zigbee doesn't have an IP address, and so no.
I mean, they have.
So the only reason,
Sorry, I'm not going to argue with you about that. Zigbee does have addresses, but not IP addresses. Why would I say anything different? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the only reason that the reason that Thread works is because the border router in a Thread context kind of makes that stuff invisible, and then all of the Thread devices all have IPv6 addresses, but the border router has to have a NAT64 like translation layer, or else it won't work because you need to go from IPv6 to IPv4. So
somebody could totally make a Zigbee router to do that, but
well, Thread's going to win.
I don't want
Thread's
to do
going to
that.
win. Everyone's implementing Thread.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, I have more questions about Goliath, but I also want to ask you questions about other things. So let's see. Are you still doing that podcast you used to do?
Which one?
Oh, well, that was
the Amp Hour?
Yes,
I still do the Amp Hour.
Yes.
I still do the Amp Hour. And I have not done the Contextual. I did the Contextual Electronics podcast for a while, but that fell away once my daughter was born. And maybe we'll go back to it someday. But yes, still have the Amp Hour and have interesting guests on, and good times.
For folks who haven't heard the Amp Hour, all three of them who listen to this show, tell me about it.
Sure. It is a mostly weekly podcast about designing electronics and people that are in the industry doing novel things. Increasingly, we talk about AI stuff, which bugs me, but we're not alone in that, I hear.
No, I'm not going to be talking about it much more.
Yeah. And trying to find things that are interesting in the space, because there's just so many different areas. You think about the differentiation between someone talking about like a super low overhead like RISC-V processor versus like someone who's doing power 250 kilovolt power line installation type thing. It's just like they're just so disparate, and yet it all still kind of falls into the same general area. And so there is a lot of interesting stuff out there, and we're just trying to still find some commonality amongst it. Mostly it's just whatever I like, to be honest.
Yeah, I understand. I was going to say, well, how does AI fit in there? But really it's whatever you like.
Yeah.
It's hard not to talk about AI these days, because the AI tells me to talk about it. So
yeah.
Are you still having shows with Dave very often?
Yeah, we do about every other week. Yeah. Dave's busy. I'm busy. So sometimes we miss. But yeah.
How are you feeling about podcasting in general?
That is a good question. I will start with, I am incredibly grateful and amazed that people still listen.
Yeah.
And for everybody who is listening, thank you. It's like, it warms my heart. It's, we've never, I don't think I'm alone here. We've never been doing it for the money. I still think it's a great way to convince people to talk to me for an hour.
Yes.
Like, whereas they might not if it was just a random like LinkedIn ping. So from all those things, it is still great. Whether it is a medium that's going to keep up, or like, whether anyone seeks out new shows anymore, I don't really have much visibility into that. But I think, much like both of you, I don't spend much time on the marketing aspect, and I'm a lot better off psychologically if I'm not like worried about whether or not people are listening. I think it's just focusing on the people that do and enjoying that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you've said. That's pretty much how I feel, and I feel like we've built a little community around the show, and people give us feedback and talk about things, and that's very gratifying. And there were probably times a few years ago when I was thinking, "Oh, what can we build this into?" And now I'm not so much thinking about that. It's like, okay, this is what it is, and it's very enjoyable. And we've backed off a little bit because it was getting challenging to keep up at the pace we were going. But yeah, I don't know what's happening. I mean, I feel like podcasting as a medium has kind of plateaued a bit. There was the whole explosion around all these very famous people doing things, and the whole Spotify thing, and that seems to have been a miss, I think, in broad strokes. And so, I think it'll probably continue as a successful medium, but it's not. I think it's past the hype stage.
Yeah, I think that's right. I have been listening with a bit of concern with both of you and the burnout, and I'm hoping you're doing a little better.
No.
Well, Chris just started his rest, and I am doing better, but it's easy for me to backslide still.
I was very burned out. I was reaching levels of high burnout 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then I had to push really hard to finish something for 3 weeks solid, and now I am totally fried. So I am hoping that some rest.
But you're taking a month or two.
Yes, but I'm not good at rest. My brain is full of now that I'm not working. Look at all these things I should do. Look at how much music I can
start
do.
One project.
Yes, I have
start one project or finish one project or start a dozen. Right?
Yeah.
Work on the ukulele.
I have two
bass for that guy.
Two woodworking projects to do. I have a session work to do for bass. I have another album to start writing. all that stuff. But I'm like, but also I could watch YouTube for 6 hours straight on the couch.
Yeah. I've never watched on the couch before. That's not good. I wouldn't do well there. I would melt in the couch at that point.
That's exactly what, yes.
YouTube is mostly lunchtime for me. That's my main time.
What do you watch on
when
YouTube?
I allow myself to watch? A lot of Colbert and like late night shows, just like clips from that. I like their monologues. That's kind of how I get my news as well, which is for better or worse. If I'm not laughing, I'm crying, kind of thing. And then I really like Wendover Productions. Do you watch that one?
I don't think I've heard of that one.
Oh, it's so good. It's about like a lot of like logistics. So like Wendover.
Yeah. Okay. I think I know.
Yeah, a lot of it like airlines and just weird stuff. Real engineering, CGP Grey. Did you watch you watch CGP Grey?
I have watched CGP Grey.
There is a video that just came out about state flags, obviously US centric, but it's like a critiquing of state flags, like he's grading the states in a class. It is 18 minutes and it's fantastic. Highly, highly, highly recommended it. I can send the link after this if you want to add that in. It was just so snarky and fun.
I'll have to watch that one.
Yeah, I do like that guy. There are some I like for particular reasons. Like if I have a math problem that I don't understand, 3 brown, 1 blue is my go-to for that if they have an answer.
Oh,
but if I am trying to rot my brain, there's this woodworking guy. I think it's Black something.
Oh,
and he does woodworking, and it's just so soothing.
yeah, like that. And then like John, the Goliath founder, got me onto vintage tool repair. Have you ever watched those?
Watch some of those. I'm not sure it's the same channel. There's a couple of them, but yeah.
There's a couple of them. Yeah. And then like the applied sciences of the world and the Mark Robers and like all of the the sciencey kind of stuff. That's great too.
Yeah. Well, and we didn't mention Z Frank because that's just a given, right?
Yep. Jeff Geerling. I'm just going through my channels now. So yeah, so many good ones. Really a lot of good stuff out there, and I could just keep going.
I need to get my recommendations to stop just giving me music theory YouTubes, because they can be relaxing and fun, because some of them go through like, oh, here's 8 songs that use this chord progression and here's how it works and stuff, and those are fun to watch. But
well, there was the one about there being an H.
Oh, the H note.
The H note.
Yeah,
that there's in fact an H note.
Yeah.
It's not just
really
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
It made me so mad. Yeah, it made me so mad.
Awesome. So awesome. It's so much fun.
Adam Neely. I'm guessing you watch Adam Neely.
I watched some of Adam Neely and he's got like an ecosystem of other YouTubers that
that's right.
That he interacts with. But for the garbage stuff, I tend to like you. I watch clips of late night shows, especially old ones, like stuff from the 80s. It's like, oh, it's David Byrne in 1982 on Letterman or something. It's like, oh my god, this is so weird to watch, but.
Yeah. I could watch Grace Hopper on Letterman like on repeat. She was so funny.
So good. Yes. That's great.
Okay. But when you aren't podcasting and you aren't working and you aren't hanging out with the kid, you also, how is there time for this? There's contextual electronics.
There's not a lot of time for that. That has been on the downslide. So yeah, that is, I've been thinking about it more. So I talked about this on the Empower 2 weeks ago. I've been like I mentioned here, like I'm doing more like partnership type stuff, and just edging away from technical stuff always kind of like gets my hackles up a little bit, because I want to stay sharp and engaged, and I'm just happiest when I'm doing technical stuff. And so I've been kind of putting together like curriculum for myself, and then I started thinking like, oh, some of this would be good if I made this curriculum for the Empower, or for Contextual Electronics rather. And it's like, oh, bad, Chris. No, don't do that.
Oh, what is the curriculum you're looking at?
So I have a couple of goals for myself around like CI/CD type stuff. So like Shawn Hymel has a really good series on Digikey, and I want to be putting my like some tool chains on there just to like get better at like having standardized firmware builds and things like that. But then also just firmware stuff, hardware stuff. Like I have all these things that like I want to be learning and getting better at. So
hang on to that.
It's not
Chris.
really curriculum. Yeah, it's not really curriculum.
Hang on to that.
Yeah.
Don't ever give it up. I did, but don't ever give it up. No, it's
I don't know. I feel like you're going to get back there.
I hope so. It's hard because I want to be excited about technical things.
Yeah, I was thinking about Alicia's class actually, and I wanted to ask about it actually. So like when you prompt the students when you're not doing the class anymore, right?
I'm not, but there might be more, and so I'm trying to figure out how much to say. So go ahead. I'll figure out.
Okay. Oh, sure. So how about the past classes? Let's just talk about that. In past classes, when you prompted them to like what was the prompt of like things they were supposed to build? Because I remember it wasn't like a specific hardware platform, right?
Right. It was something that had a Cortex-M that had at least one button, at least two different peripherals like SPI or PWM, had a UART debug console. I think that, and had an interesting algorithmic component.
Okay.
And so
that's good. Yeah.
It was
very open-ended, but with, you must at least do these things.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's great. I think, it is always kind of like that balance of like, how prescriptive are you? So like compared to like, Jay Carlson's college class that he taught was with the EFM8 specifically, right? And they had like set curriculum and like the nice thing about that is that it's like, well, there is kind of fewer ways to do things. So maybe TAing that kind of thing is slightly easier.
Yeah. My poor TAs.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then, but then the opposite is like you don't get as much variety, and people are more constrained into like what the output can be. So I was kind of thinking about like, well, what if contextual electronics was like prompting people like go and build this thing, and then kind of showing how I did it, and seeing how people change stuff. It's tough, especially with like people coming in with different contexts of like, well, I've never built any hardware before. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's going to be different than like I built some hardware, but I want to get better at the microcontroller piece of it. And it's like, so like kind of just all the balancing there.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been easier to grade something that was more consistent. I think the ecosystems were the thing that was the hardest for the TAs because I didn't limit them to any particular ecosystem. And some people...
Did you say no Arduino?
Yeah, I said no Arduino. I said it has to be something you can step through.
Yeah, that's a good.
I can step through Arduino if you just go in and you take the clock off the chip.
No, they have it now.
Yeah, I know.
Arduino has that built in. Yeah.
And so not having the consistent overall thing made it more difficult. But the variety of what the students came up with and how they got to talk. I mean, I didn't have to tell them very much about the different processors because they told each other about the different processors based on what they were using. And that part worked out really well. And we also did Micro Madness, where everybody had...
It's like a Final Four kind of thing?
Exactly. And everybody had a processor and a dev board that they were assigned, and they were just randomly assigned and told to look up the data sheet, because we were talking about how to read data sheets and how to compare processors. And then I asked them totally arbitrary questions. I mean, sure, there was price and size and power, but then there was also how many vowels are in it? How many vowels are in the name?
Yeah. It matters,
It just sometimes they're arbitrary. And yeah, we did this basketball style elimination. It was a lot of fun. And when you lost, you went on the team of the person who you lost to. And so then everybody got a little bit more information as they went on about the different processors and the comparison. And they really enjoyed that exercise. And it was a lot of fun for me too, because I mean, the hardest part for me was every year trying to come up with a different list, or at least augment the list so I didn't have the same list as, time to time. Yeah. And so things like that, I wish I could do more. The group teaches itself activities. But those are, of course, the hardest ones to do.
And you have to you had to teach a live class to kind of have that group thing.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So like synchronous versus asynchronous type of stuff too. That's another challenge. I feel like the synchronous is like very motivating because like there's kind of that social pressure and just the wanting to interact and whatever. But then the downside, of course, is time zones and just making sure people are there every week, that sort of thing.
And getting yourself there every week.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally.
It's a lot of work.
So I guess I will mention that I'm not doing another class anytime soon, but we are probably going to have a cohort that does it without me, in that they can watch the video. It won't be as expensive, but they can watch the videos and the exercises and get the quizzes and work through things themselves. I think the part we're still working on is how much will they talk to each other? Will there be a Discord? Will there be a forum? Will there be a TA? How much of it will be solo? So I'm working on that. I'm hoping it comes out in May. But as it's April and I haven't been working very hard on it, we'll see.
It is April, yeah. It's a weekend April, Chris. Sorry. Week later, April Fools.
Oh no!
And I think that's kind of a similar, kind of where contextual electronics is too. Like all of the recorded content's on there, and people can. There's like forum support, but that's it. So, nothing new recently.
And that's hard because I want to keep adding, but it's also there's only so many hours in the day, and I found teaching live to just be exhausting.
Yeah.
Even, it was it was kind of energizing because the people were neat and it was fun, but I would get off of class. I would then just fall apart for the
day. They were
day.
long classes too, right? It wasn't an hour.
It was an hour to an hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
And usually the TAs would take over. Well, it was an hour to 2 hours, and usually the TAs would take over after an hour. And we break into groups and they discuss stuff.
But sometimes it was a couple hours.
Yes. And I really liked the people. I liked meeting them. I liked talking to them, but I'm just not a people person.
Yeah. That's like a classic introvert. Like you can talk to people, but then you got to recharge.
And I can talk to one person at a time, and it doesn't bug me too much. But talking to
two people sometimes even too.
Well, Chris doesn't count.
I don't count.
He's inside the bubble.
Yes. Yeah. I see. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for having me to the bubble. This is a fine bubble you have here.
It's comfy.
Yeah.
Well, I is there anything else you want to say about now I can't even say it right. Goliath.
Here's another interesting thing about pronouncing names. When I went I was just in Germany for the Embedded World Conference, and I'm not sure what it is about the spelling, but Zephyr. Many people in Europe they say like Zephyr. I'm not sure if it's like just how the vowels are pronounced, but like the first couple times that it happened at Embedded World last year, I kind of did. I'm like, oh, what are you saying? What is Sapphire? No, Zephyr. Zephyr. So yeah.
I think that's the right pronunciation for the PHYR.
Fire?
Yeah.
Huh.
Like Fire Festival? FYRE.
But we say Zephyr. At least we don't say Zedfer.
Well, that doesn't make any sense.
About Goliath, you try it out. It's Mike and I make a lot of videos and blog posts, and not specific to Goliath, but Zephyr just got a new DevRel person as well, Benjamin Cabe, and he has a great newsletter that I've been really enjoying, where he does like weekly updates about what's new in the project. So recommend that as well. He might make a good guest on the show. Making lots of content. So check it out, blog.goliath.io.
And Zephyr and Goliath both have very good Discord servers.
Yes. I'm not a Discord person myself. I don't like Discord servers. We do have one, but I don't. Yeah, not for me. I don't like that's like synchronous again, right? It's just like I like asynchronous. So there's a forum too.
What you mean? You don't just drop a question on there and leave until the next day? That's usually what I do.
That's how I use Slack.
Well, I'm the person who has to answer a lot of those questions. So.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I am interested in learning more stuff about firmware. So please point me to resources, either in the comments of this episode or send me a note on Mastodon or email or anything like that. I love learning new things. So hit me up.
Our guest has been Chris Gammell, Developer Relations at Goliath and host of the AMP Hour podcast. He is not our sworn enemy any longer. We like him very much.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm keeping the handle though. I'm gonna keep calling myself that. Thanks for having me.
Always great to talk to you.
Thank you to Christopher for producing and co-hosting. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to contact us, show@embedded.fm or hit the contact link on Embedded FM.
And we have a newsletter.
And we have a newsletter. And we have a Patreon. If you want to hear more of us at any time, there's more to be had. So now a quote to leave you with from Dr. Seuss. Sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple.